I'm Fatheree,
This is Dave.
and this is Tex-Trek.
Engage.
Welcome back aboard the Starship Texas for the 138th installment of the Tex-Trek podcast, the home of Star Trek fandom from deep in the heart of Texas, where we talk all about Star Trek all the time. And tonight we are returning to Deep Space Nine for the first time in 3 years, I believe. We're finally getting around to doing more Deep Space Nine talk.
It's on my schedule, Father. This is how I marathon things at that speed.
Yeah, like a few years ago, I think it was in 2018, I might be wrong, but Dave and I discussed season 1 of Deep Space Nine. He had not seen it when it first aired. He's just getting around to watching it now.
Mm-hmm. It is the Star Trek of which I have seen the least. I had seen more. Maybe at the time I had seen less Voyager. No, actually, at the time we were recording, I'd seen a little bit more Voyager, and I'd seen some Enterprise and all that stuff, even though I hadn't finished those shows. But yeah, DS9, heralded by many as the best. It was the one I had seen,
including myself.
Yeah. It's not an unpopular opinion these days. I think it used to be.
It used to be.
But Father, you have swayed people to it.
I suppose. It kind of caught me off guard when other people figured it out. It's like, wait a minute, I thought I was the only one smart enough to know DS9 was the best. But I guess y'all finally caught up to me. But that's okay. No, but this is the one that I've watched the most. And I say that as someone, I've seen every episode of Trek at least 4 times. And that's like including like that last season of Discovery. I've seen all of those 4 times. Like, that is the bare minimum. I've seen it any episode at least 3 times. I don't know how many times I've seen all of DS9 though. Probably like getting close to a dozen times.
You're like one of Dune's mentats, but about Star Trek specifically.
I guess. I don't know. It doesn't. I can't remember like every single detail, but maybe with enough rewatches, eventually I'll develop that computer brain and it'll all just be embedded. But yeah, we talked about season 1, and I called it the worst season of DS9, and you said that you still liked it.
Liked a lot about it. I mean, obviously there were lots of good standout episodes, but you know, I think the same thing that the reason that Trek is kind of comfort food for people, and I think especially maybe the older shows can be a little bit more comfort foody because of their standalone nature, and they are a little bit more quietly paced at times, but you like just hanging out with those crew members. It's got a pretty set cast, you know, usually, and it's a little bit like hanging out with another family. And so if you like the people that are in that mix, you're going to see some good stuff. Even in a sort of middling episode, you're going to be like, that was a great Quark scene, or, oh, I really liked, you know, that Bashir O'Brien sequence, or their friendship throughout the episode. So yeah, kind of getting introduced to all of that, seeing the darker edge of the show right from the beginning with Sisko blackmailing Quark into staying on board when everyone else was running. You know, it had a tone that was one that I liked, which was you know, a little bit more of a realistic streak for Trek, of course.
Well, no, we're going to be talking about season 2, but we're going to split this up because these are 26 episode seasons we're dealing with. So we're going to do 13 now, and then we'll do another podcast in the near future, and we'll do the second half of season 2, episodes 14 through 26 of season 2.
Yep. Which you tell me is the better half.
I do. I had never thought about splitting it up like this before, but now that I am doing that and looking at where the episodes fall, the second half of season 2 is definitely stronger. But before we get started, because I do want to go ahead and jump in, we have 13 episodes to talk about. But one
We're
thing
gonna we're gonna fly through them.
yeah, we're gonna warp speed this. But one thing I want to point out is that Deep Space Nine is the more character driven Star Trek show. It has like a little bit more emphasis on character. And season 2, there's a lot of character development and just like seeing new shades of these characters, and there's a lot of stories that, you know, shine lights on their histories, their background. And I think this season they're kind of transitioning from a little bit more narrative focused writing in season 1, and in season 2 they're kind of changing gears to becoming a more character centric show. And there's a little bit of growing pains in that, where actually like some of the plots I think are weaker than a lot of season 1 episodes, but there's so much character stuff in this season that and we begin to see that stuff blossom, and that's what gets even greater and greater and greater the further you go into DS9. I think season 3 is leaps and bounds better than this, and then 4 is even better than 3, and it really keeps going until you get to like 6.
Was it 5 or
6? But I love 7 too. It just it kind of stops evolving at 6, I think.
Right. They've hit their perfect groove.
Yeah, but let's talk about the Circle trilogy, is what people call these first 3 episodes of season 2. That is Star Trek's first 3-episode story arc. The episodes The Homecoming, The Circle, and The Siege. I'm just going to read the synopses for these episodes that I'm getting off of Memory Alpha, then we'll kind of expand on that with spoilers to summarize, and we'll just talk about our thoughts on it. But the first episode, The Homecoming. Kira rescues a Bajoran resistance hero from a Cardassian labor camp. An extremist group calls for all non-Bajorans to leave Bajor. Yeah, basically, Kira goes to rescue this famous Bajoran called Lee Nollis, and there's this group called The Circle that's like a Bajoran supremacist, I guess. They don't like any aliens. They want them all to leave Bajor. Then in the second episode, The Circle, Sisko and Odo work to reveal the real force behind the Circle's coup. And we find out that the Circle, they take over the Bajoran government, and they're actually being supplied weapons through the Cardassians. They're using a proxy to get the weapons there. They don't know they're coming from the Cardassians because the Cardassians want the Circle to drive the Federation away from Bajor so that the Cardassians can take over and regain control of the coveted wormhole. Then in the third episode, the Siege, Sisko tries to prevent the Circle from taking the station. Kira and Dax take proof that the Cardassians are the real force that is arming the Circle to the Bajoran government. And they basically expose the coup and save the day. Dave, what did you think of the Circle trilogy?
So I thought this was a super badass start to the season. In some ways, it actually I was like that, and like a few strong episodes that followed led me to think, I'm like, oh man, it can do no wrong. And then I did hit a few weaker episodes in there, but I think it's a great start with a politically sophisticated plot. Lots of cool machinations between, is it Kai Wynn? Is that the lady?
Vedic Wynn.
Vedic Wynn? Oh, okay, yeah, that's right. And Minister Jaro, kind of their interrelated machinations.
A big guest star too. He's played by Dracula.
Frank Langella, Dracula, Skeletor, I believe, and a few other. He's played some big villains. He's a commanding screen presence. No, I thought it was fantastic. I noticed that like just within the first 5 minutes of the first episode, they had kind of nicely summed up the previous season. They reminded you how unstable Bajor was, and that they were in danger of losing it all. You had the rise of this nationalistic movement, which I don't know if it's like meant to parallel anything directly, but I presume it maybe like post World War I sort of second rise of German nationalism to paving the way for World War II. I was thinking like the Bajoran are such an oppressed people. It's kind of weird to suddenly tag them with that nationalist smear, but it's a thing that happens when people are like desperate, right?
Yeah, and I like that there's so much diversity with the Bajorans, that we see different aspects of their society, including
sexy Bajoran. Who's the guy who's got the thing for Kira?
Oh, that's Vedic Baral, who's her. Yeah, he's her love interest right now in the show.
Yep. And I also I thought that it was off to a the opening scene where what is it? Quark, he throws some other skeevy traitor or something under the bus to and again serves him up to Odo, and Odo cannot figure out why he turned this guy in. That had my favorite rule of acquisition too. Just got to get it got things going on a pretty quick. What was it? Every once in a while, make peace with your enemies.
Yeah, it confuses the hell out of them.
Yeah. That one cracked me up and was the start of a lot of fun Ferengi stuff that's already gone on.
And then we get Odo deputizes Quark in this story, so we get to see the two of them team up.
Yeah, it's kind of under duress, like a lot of things that happen with Quark and Odo, but yes, he does. So I think the heart of that first episode is the story of Lee Nollis, the hero who kind of has feet of clay. Well, by the way, badass prison break. That's cool special effects. Just a cool was it O'Brien and Kira on this fast strike run where they stealth into the base and bust out a bunch of prisoners.
O'Brien has to play like an Irish pimp.
Yes. He's all like, don't touch the goods until the deal is made, and all this. I kind of love when they get to do that. Honestly, Father, it makes me think of role playing games. For Brian, who's not here, because so often characters in role playing games have to make bluffs, and it comes down to a roll usually. But they make kind of these audacious bluffs like that, and they tend to play out a little bit better in fiction usually than they do with a random dice roll to support them. But yeah, he is actually Lee Nollis is a good guy and a great fighter, but the myth that's blown up around him is kind of BS, and he knows it. And he his big fight with the Cardassian that he supposedly defeated in this mighty single-handed combat. What did he kill him in his sleep or something like that?
He killed him when he was coming out of the lake or the river that he was bathing in.
Right.
He literally caught him with his pants down. He was standing there in his underwear, off guard.
Heroic thing, yeah. And he has to play with that, and Sisko is pushing him in the episode. And Sisko is sympathetic, but he's like, "Sorry, your people need you. You're gonna have to keep on being, this larger than life legend." And that's pretty brutal to imagine. This guy just made it out of a POW camp, and Sisko's like, your job ain't over. I thought that was a tough but believable. And then the one other thing I kind of wanted to mention about that first episode, at least, was just that on the more human side of things, or on the lighter side, that Jake comes to his dad, and I'm trying to remember. Is he talking about? Is it dating stuff?
Yeah, he's going on his first date.
He's going on his first date, and there's just this quintessential thing. Father, you've talked about them as a really ideal father-son relationship. And he's like, "Hey, Dad, you got a minute?" And Sisko says this really very warm and convincing. He's like, "For you, absolutely." and it's just he's such a good dad, even though he also kind of misreads that, Jake wants advice and stuff from him, and that
made it feel more real though. He was like, "Oh, so you want my advice on how to ask her out?" He's like, "No, I already asked her out," because parents always I think underestimate how fast their kids are growing up.
Yeah, and he's freaking out because Jake is talking about maybe taking her to the Hollow Suites and stuff, and he's like, "No, whoa." So the episode had a lot of everything that I kind of like about the show. There was sort of the warmth of the father and son thing, some great skirmishing with Odo and Quark, a politically volatile situation, Kira being the kind of badass that she is.
Antifa Kira. I love when we can see her go back to her guerrilla warfare roots.
Absolutely. Which we'll get talked about more in one of my favorite episodes later. But
yes. The best one we're going to talk about today, in my opinion.
I think that's probably true. There was this little small bit that I wanted to mention, because the what is it? Vedic Wynn and her she allies with like Minister Jaro to they they want to make a power play, and they're gonna unite their sort of religious and forces with secular forces, and he's gonna promote her to essentially what their pope, which is what do they call it?
The Kai, which
Kai, right?
there's currently an election. Like this is like an election year because the last Kai died in season 1.
And he's like, I'll pull the strings, I'll make it happen.
Yeah.
And I by the way, I love that she just throws him under the fucking bus at the end of it.
They're both such slimy politicians. Like they're both such like hateable characters.
When they're together, they're like, nothing can stop us. And he's like, yes, we will unite. And then when it comes to it, oh man, they just turn on each other. But I feel that they are among the scarier types of villains because they feel so real. But there was a lighter bit where one of their machinations is they put Lee Nallas, they give him Kira's job on the station, and kind of because they're secretly running or was it Jaro? Is he the one who's in charge of the secretly running the circle?
Right. Yeah.
And he they don't want anything to upstage their coup, so they don't want Lee in the mix. So they position him on DS9 to get him out of the way, and then that also lets them just file Kira off to somewhere on the planet. And she ends up working at like the temple, and there's a bit where Vedic Bareil says she's like, I'm not used to feeling useless. It's clear she's just so keyed up. She wants to do things. She's goal oriented, and he's like, you might want to explore feeling useless for a while, which is actually probably a really good piece of advice if she wasn't in such a needed place. Like Kira has a lot of problems and could probably stand to just cut them loose for a while.
I love that wacky moment too when she's like packing up to leave the station and just like everyone ended up showing up in her quarters. It's so weird and quirky, and
it was almost a little too forced, but it also is a good scene. This combination of exasperation from Kira, even as people are like kind of all rallying around her. It's like all her friends and frenemies like Quark. But that you enjoyed the scene though?
Yeah, I agree. It does probably take things like a little too far, but I feel like it's something like I would want to write. It would be kind of like self-indulgent, but I just find that like really entertaining.
Writing strict realism can be boring, and a little bit of heightened reality is kind of a welcome change sometimes. I think Star Trek is pretty decent at finding that balance.
I like in the third episode, in the Siege, where they have to do the station evacuation, and the way that Sisko has to like kind of disobey orders from Admiral Chakotay. This is the first use of the name Chakotay in Star Trek.
I think the spelling was a little different.
Yeah, it is. It is different.
But yeah, somebody clearly liked the name, I guess.
But he tells him, you have to leave the station, and Sisko's like, okay, well, if we start like taking all of our equipment and stuff with us, well, we're going to be stuck here for days, so we'll get the civilians out and then stay behind and do this. So it's that cool little like work around the Prime Directive, find some loophole, do whatever. Star Trek does that all the time, and it was fun to watch I guess this is another thing Star Trek does a lot, but like the ships being taken over, like the stations being taken over, and
yeah,
they have to defend
it lets them do their Die Hard.
Yeah.
Die Hard on
but it's a team
station.
effort. It's not just like like Picard going against some terrorist on the Enterprise and Starship Mine.
Discovery, when Michael Burnham was loose on the ship as a one-man infiltration team, was very Die Hard. This is only like in the concept of this is almost more of a like miniature guerrilla resistance movement.
It's like the Alamo. It's like they turned Deep Space Nine into the Alamo.
But they do these kind of things where they've got they're outthinking and outwitting the occupiers, and it's pretty satisfying. It like gives like some nice action for the final act to it. I didn't like that Lee Nallas had to die, because and you had seen him kind of finding his voice when there was a panic over evacuation, and he kind of like has his leader voice and he brings everybody together.
I like when he's giving like that speech, when Lee Nallas is like giving like that speech to all the people, and you see like Morn of all, like, you
Mhm.
got like dumbass Warren in the back, and he's like looks like he's like actually like listening. He's like, oh, like, this guy's like really good. I'm gonna listen to him.
Did he do like one of the
Yeah,
yeah?
I think so. Yeah.
Um, there's a Lee, I think, does get a cool line when he dies, because he'd been talking with Cisco about. Cisco basically said, "You're not off the hook yet," and so when he's lying
Mm,
there dying near the end, he's like, I think he says like "off the hook after
yeah.
all" or something like that. And it's like this almost almost kind of comedic thing, but it's super dark, in that
But
context.
it seals his fate as being remembered as like this bigger than life hero.
Yeah, and
Like,
that's a thematic thing about it. Father, I know that you are a man who is a strong adherent to the truth in all matters. But this is a case where Cisco chooses to very deliberately propagandize this guy. Specifically, like O'Brien is like, "Hey, what do you think about that? Captain or Commander? He was not the guy that the legend said." And then Cisco is like, "I'm going to tell people he was the guy the legend said." So, what do you think about that,
yeah,
Father?
I probably wouldn't have done that, but
No, I wondered about that because like propaganda does serve a purpose in a war effort, and I don't know if they were in a wartime thing, but they did talk about how the provisional government of Bajor is like could collapse at any time, just like it was in the first season. It's clearly volatile, and he did serve up a little bit of nationalistic mythology, even while they're putting down the nationalistic, the QAnon of Bajor, the Circle.
and just one other thing that we skipped over that I just want to add is that I think it was kind of darkly humorous when Quark is gets hate crimed when they like brand that thing on him.
Oh right,
Uh, just like it because of his screaming. It's actually like kind of a
I did not realize until this season that the wailing,
I think it
Ferengi
was invented
scream,
here. I think this is the
the
beginning of it.
thing. There's well
But you
the
you hear Nog and Rom both do it in these later episodes we're about to talk
yeah.
about.
I guess you're right. There is a very specific one that's it's amazing later. But yes, I guess you're right. That was the start of it all.
And also the that spider that's on the Bajoran moon, the Plutako or
Oh yeah. It was an adorable
Paluku.
little puppet.
Yeah, I like that. Just like they wouldn't do that today in any of the new shows, but I wish that they could show stuff like that. The other Star franchise would do it though. They don't mind puppets.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Let's move on to episode 4 of season 2,
Mhm.
where the station is evacuated again. Strangely enough,
This
uh,
one in a very, in that. I guess you're right. It's a very sort of contrived bottle episode way.
yes, this is invasive procedures. The synopsis reads: A desperate Trill tries to steal the Dax symbiont. Basically, we have John Glover shows up as a Trill who was rejected from the Symbiosis Commission, and now he's like, nope, I'm here to like get this Trill. Uh, the little team he brings on board the station, they take over and they try to get the doctor to perform the procedure. He actually does, and then Cisco turns on him. Cisco shoots him and gets the symbiote back to save Jadzia.
With a little bit of help from the the guy's allies.
Yes, but you get to see Cisco do like some cool like it's very like Kirk the way that he kind of he plays her where
Yeah,
he's kind of like manipulative and tricksy trying to get
yeah.
her to turn on him.
Before we get to it, I want to say I always like seeing that actor John Glover, aka Smallville's Lionel Luthor.
Yeah, he's in a lot of DC stuff.
Right, he
He's
was
Dr. Woodrow in Batman and Robin, the
yep.
beloved Batman movie.
He is
Um,
totally that's a bonkers role as opposed to his kind of refined version of evil in Smallville.
and he's in Shazam. He's in the Shazam movie.
Oh, is he? He's not Savannah.
No, but he's Savannah's father.
Okay, yeah. He's kind of always a good presence, and you know what I thought was interesting about him here
Oh, and the
is
Riddler. He did the Riddler on BTAS.
that's right. His voice is so distinct. Yeah. Um, that's Batman the Animated Series for you people who don't know acronyms. But he's an unsure of himself guy in this. Well, he's both like, he's clearly resolved to do what he's got to do, but early on in the episode, he's kind of an unusual villain in that he comes in. First of all, I like the whole storm ravaging the station. I like storms, and I don't care if it's a plasma storm or a hurricane. The idea of sort of battening down the hatches in like a fort sort of thing like they are, I think is just a neat setting.
Yeah, it's just weird that they evacuated right. Like, I kind of wish that they had just made this like a continuation of episode 3. I'm sure like they didn't want it to become like a 4-part story arc, but just before everyone's come back, that's when like John Glover attacks. That's when he strikes.
I guess because I think I don't like the way my mind works when most of these episodes are standalone is that the time is so nebulous in them that it almost doesn't quite matter where they slot in unless there's some big continuity thing in them. So, it didn't feel weird at all to me. I'm used to one episode just being a completely discrete entity from the others. Or at least that's a lot of the kind of Trek I like. Now, Fatheree, have you ever seen this old movie called Key Largo with Humphrey Bogart?
I've not.
He's out in the I forget exactly what the premise is, but he's an ex-GI who's out in the Florida Keys and staying at this hotel when most of the key is evacuated because of a hurricane. And he and just a handful of other guests are still at the hotel. For whatever reason, they couldn't get the boat out or something. And it looks like, I think there's like a meeting between some mobsters that occurs there. And the mobsters take over the hotel, and there's this kind of this suspenseful rest of the movie as you wait to see, is this ex-GI who's clearly kind of sworn off of violence a little bit, kind of in that Western style. Is he gonna, kick some ass?
It's kind of a hostage situation, or not necessarily like a hostage situation, but like, in this case, in this episode, it's they're just like prisoners. They're just being like,
right. They aren't trying to ransom them off or anything like that.
Right.
But yeah, it reminded me of that, and I feel like that had to have been at least partially an inspiration, even though it doesn't speak to the very specific story about Trill and symbionts. So John Glover's character, though, he's like, I'm sorry I'm doing this. He's like, I don't want to hurt anyone. And he's clearly very self-involved. It's kind of bullshit.
Yeah.
But I thought it was interesting to have a villain who's kind of apologetic in a way.
Well, it made me think, what temptation would I want enough that would make me be like this selfish, where I'd be like, okay, yeah, like this young girl's gonna die and I'm just gonna ignore it. And I couldn't think of anything.
Yeah.
But
I guess, I think he has to be, and Father, you're a little into yourself sometimes, but I think he's a special level. It's also like, I guess he views the, having a symbiont as being like a superpower,
Yeah, he's entitled to it.
Yeah.
There's been like this grave mistake, like he probably thinks that the symbiote deserves to be joined with him. Probably thinks he's doing a favor to the symbiote.
Yeah, he clearly just kind of shuts off the death. He's like, oh, I'm sorry. Still do it. What does he have? 2 Klingon mercenaries?
Yeah,
and then there's
one of them played by Tim Russ, who will go on to be Tuvok.
Oh, man. How did I miss that? I didn't catch that. I know you. I think you told me about it like a year or so back when I just first watched the episode. But
and he was also one of the terrorists in Starship Mine who took over the Enterprise when Picard went all diehard. So Tuvok likes to take control of ships or stations.
There's a cool fight scene, speaking of that stuff, where they kind of do what I always kind of like, at least people to try if they can when they're in these captive situations, which is not to have some big plan, but just to, when there's kind of the bad guys that are controlling him are like kind of looking away for a second, just take your shot. Somebody just grabs a gun, and so like Sisko and Kira are fighting with him, and like Sisko's fighting a Klingon and Kira's fighting the prostitute that John Glover's character had rescued from her life on I guess a really pretty awful situation. And she outfights Kira. I was thinking, like, man,
she's had a rough life.
It actually made me think this is why she's so devoted to him. If she had to learn to fight that hard where she lived, then it was a bad situation.
It's like some Tasha Yar level stuff.
Yes. Oh, man. But it was a cool fight scene, and Sisko wails on that Klingon pretty good.
We get more Ferengi screaming with Quark.
Right, that was a classic. He exaggerates it because he wants to, they want to pull a scheme so that they can get out, and ultimately it does set things
They
up.
need Odo out of sickbay. That's kind of cool. It kind of makes Odo seem like more of a badass when the bad guys are like, nope, like we're locking you up. First thing we do is lock up Odo. And then at the end, when Odo's free and Kara's all confident and she's like, you know what? I'm not even worried. There's no way you're getting off of the station if Odo's like loose running around. There's cool character stuff, like I was saying here, with you get to see more of the Trill side of things and get to learn a little bit more about Dax. And that was fun to see when John Glover's character, Varad, when he becomes
Right.
Varad Dax, and then he's like, "Oh, Benjamin, like remember the bachelor party and all that stuff," and
Yeah.
and you
And Cisco plays to it.
yeah, when he's like, "Oh yeah, remember when we discovered the wormhole?" and try to like stimulate like that guilt in them, and like the climax of the episode, like Cisco was willing to kill Dax to save Jadzia because she will die. She needs that worm installed back into her, or she will die
Basically,
for
she's
sure.
got an hour once it's removed from her to live.
Well, they said like she might last longer because like she's like young and healthy, but
right.
but yeah, the clock is ticking.
Tops.
So it's like the dramatic clock that I always talk about that TOS
Right.
did well and TNG should have done better. But yeah, like when he shoots him, because he's like like stunning Dax could have the when it's freshly joined, like that could have hurt the simulant, but he's willing to risk it.
He's being the hard-boiled hero when he does that.
Right. And
because the other option is this guy gets a win and she dies anyway.
Yeah.
I liked Cisco in this episode. You talked about him doing the psychological warfare where he tries to tell the prostitute, hey, when he becomes Dax, he's not going to be the same person. And what I really liked is that she's smart enough to say, I know you're not going to talk me out of it. He and I already discussed it. I know he's going to be different, but he's going to be the same person, just more to him or whatever. But then when it actually does happen, she catches that it feels like his interest in her has dropped, like died away, and that when they're supposed to meet somewhere afterwards, she's like, I could tell he wasn't going to do it. And so finally, Cisco's long play con, it's not something like, it's not like Kirk quite outwitting a robot, it's a long con, does finally win the day.
Well, shall we move on to episode 5, Cardassians?
Yes. Awful title, by the way.
Yeah.
For like an episode that actually has some interesting depth to it, that is the most generic title.
Well, when Ira takes over the writing in season 3, they get more exciting episode titles, much like TOS, and not like boring TNG Voyager episode titles like Cardassians.
Yeah. So yeah, hit me, Fatheree. What's the breakdown on how it goes on in this one?
Garrick and Dr. Bashir investigate abandoned Cardassian war orphans on Bajor. Basically, there's this Cardassian orphan who's been left behind from the occupation. He's about to be returned to his father in the Cardassian Union. And they figure out that, like, oh, Gul Dukat actually planted this orphan years ago just to sabotage his political enemy. Wow, that's crazy. But Garrick and Bashir expose it, and at the end, the boy goes off to live with his dad. So, what do you think?
What's interesting is, like, I loved the ride in this episode. Garrick and Bashir as a team is great because Garrick is, like, always, like, 3 steps ahead of Bashir, and, like, Bashir ends up, like, standing there like with his dick in the wind all the time. Whenever Cisco's like, wait, he's like, you want to get a runabout or you want to do this or that? He's like, why are you wanting to do this? And he's like, well, Garrick said that such and such, and he's like, so you don't actually know, or you're just doing what Garrick said, and he just gets busted over and over by Cisco on this. So, but it's pretty fun to watch. He's a fun person to watch get played. I don't know how I felt about like kind of how it ended, who the kids ends up with and all of that, but I for sure thought that the ride was really interesting.
Yeah, I'm okay with the ending. Like, it made sense to me, like for him to like go live with his biological dad. Like they do a good job like showing like, oh yeah, this guy is actually going to be like a decent dad. It's a little bit like that Star Trek nuance. Like, not every Cardassian is terrible.
Right, he was clearly, and what's interesting is that there's sort of nuance on both sides here, where the Bajorans who had ended up. So this kid was like a war orphan left behind when the Cardassians pulled out, right?
Yeah.
And they his parents had been like broadly kind to him, but clearly had kind of made him hate Cardassians, and therefore that aspect of himself. You know, he kind of hated himself, but they never hurt him. They loved him in their way, but they were also, you know, would probably, you know, maybe I guess didn't realize that in their bitterness towards the Cardassians that they were effectively abusing him and wrecking his self-esteem. But they are, you know, a lot of the time they are decent people, and his biological father also a good guy for the most part, at least insofar as his love for his son and his desire to do right by him. They suggest in this episode that Garrick, does he have a particular beef with Gul Dukat?
They first bring that up here, and Bashir articulates that. He's like, I don't think he likes Dukat very much, when they're asking, like, well, why is Garrick helping us? He's very mysterious, and I that's what I love about Garrick, and we will learn like bits and pieces about it throughout, and they will play out that Dukat Garrick rivalry. They never expose all the details, but we just get like these little tidbits here and there, and okay. I love some of them, but I won't tell them to you because I'll just let them hit you when they hit you. But they're
cool.
fun.
No, I'm glad to hear that does continue, and it wasn't just like a one-off that went nowhere at all.
Yeah.
But I thought that like the kid did good. There's an interesting sequence with the O'Brien family that kind of fosters the kid while he's on DS9. Racist O'Brien is like. You know, he throws around words like cardies and stuff at the top of a hat.
But you have to keep in mind what they established on The Next Generation about O'Brien and the Cardassians. Mm-hmm. When he tells a Cardassian, you know, after he had fought like this war against them and the Cardassians were so terrible with their war crimes, he tells the Cardassian, like, I don't hate you because of who you are, I hate you because of what you turned me into. And
right.
It's
sure.
His anger at them just is a little bit more of just like his guilt for feeling anger at them.
When he's with the kid, he definitely does his best. I feel like don't they sort of bond over Keiko's like bad cooking or
the Cardassian soup? They didn't like the Cardassian food.
Yeah, bad attempt at Cardassian because the little kid he doesn't want Cardassian stuff because he's been led to hate.
He likes Bajoran. He wants to eat Hasperat or some Bajoran food.
You know what he wants to do is he wants to bite Cardassians. That's what he wants to physically eat them. That's what he tried to do
That is a funny opening when Garrick's like, "My, what a handsome boy you have here!" Ah!
So here's something I thought was interesting. When I was looking it up, I found out that there's a book that follows what happened to Rugal when he as he grew up.
Mm-hmm.
It's called the Never-Ending Sacrifice. I don't know how focused on him it is, but he's at least a supporting character, and I think you see him some years after the events of this.
Yeah. That's a name of an in-universe piece of Cardassian literature.
Oh, interesting. Huh.
That Garrick gives to Bashir. I might have
misread something, but I could have sworn I saw that it was a novel, but maybe
it might be.
Maybe I misread it. But yeah, I really liked this one. I thought it had like a lot of sort of nuance to it, and also revealed the depths of Cardassian, manipulation. That yes, he would. The implication was that Gul Dukat had dressed as a woman. Am I correct? Because they said it was a woman who had dropped off the baby.
Well, I think it was one of Dukat's underlings. I don't think.
Okay, I wasn't sure how. I
don't think the prefect of Terok Nur dressed up in drag and did that himself undercover.
I wouldn't have thought so either, but they kind of they made out it was such a particular plan of his. But yes, he that he would years and years earlier set up this political manipulation just to humiliate a guy who was now a political rival. That is some Machiavellian shit. And,
it's kind of a Romulan move, but
yeah, that's true. That's true.
One last thing I want to add is that part of the realism that I like is that things like there being war orphans left behind and stuff, but also the fact that the Cardassians had such influence over Bajorans that the orphanage was keeping records Cardassian style. It's just something that you see a lot where with imperialism, there's a lot of British influence over how things are done in the Republic of Ireland, or like
Right.
in India, or like there's a lot of like
Yeah, this kind of
French.
gross thing where you absorb your captor's style
Yeah,
or their way of life.
like French influence in Vietnam, and like stuff
Sure,
like that.
for sure.
Um, sure. Let's talk about the next episode. So we'll move on to episode 6 of season 2, Melora. Dr. Bashir ends up falling in love with a new officer when he develops a way for her to function in a high gravity environment. Meanwhile, Quark receives a death threat from one of his former associates. So, not just to mainly focus on the A story. Yeah, we get the character Ensign Melora, who is from a low gravity world. She is meant to be kind of a allegory for disabled people or people who have to use wheelchairs. And we have this cool romance, or I think it's cool. Some people might not be into it, but between her and Bashir. This episode is actually written by Evan Sommers, who was disabled himself in real life, used a wheelchair, and it was kind of in reaction to Next Generation, to seeing like Worf be so terrified of the thought of being disabled that he wants to commit suicide. And it inspired this writer to tell a story of an actual functional disabled person within Star Trek.
I read that backstory and I thought that was interesting. I mean, of course, like Worf is coming from a Klingon perspective in that episode, which is gonna. It's kind of a known thing that the Klingons have some dodgy views on a lot of stuff. So, but
Yeah, they're a little backwards sometimes.
but I get that like the message of that episode still seemed to ring through that oh my gosh, it's a fate worse than death to lose the ability to move, and so this was kind of a counterpoint. Unfortunately for me, it's the first sort of weak episode of this season, and I feel like it feels more dated to me. It feels like it kind of came from an era when even when you had someone who was a wheelchair user, the story still had to be kind of about that. In the same way, it reminded me of how like the early black superheroes all had a chip on their shoulder.
Or they were
Well,
all
this
called
character,
Black Panther or Black Lightning or Black whatever.
yeah, well, and like they all were pissed off at the man, and race had to be first and foremost, not like their character, just as like her wheelchair use is first and foremost kind of about this character. She herself is a strong character, and I like basically when things do fall away, when she sees that Bashir is not like condescending to her, which is nice growth. Like just it's good to see Bashir being a little bit more than season one's a little bit just of a horn dog, and that once they do start just seeing each other and going to Klingon restaurants,
I love
which
that. I love that restaurant. I
yeah,
love that you have to go there and like speak Klingon to get like the good gawk. And it reminds me of the company I work for is based in northern Iowa.
mm-hmm.
And I had like some coworkers who, like, when they would go up there, they would tell me like, "Oh, there's this really good Mexican food restaurant. It's like one of the best places to eat there." And I went there. Typically, as a Texan, I would never eat Mexican food outside of Texas or maybe Mexico, but that's it. If I go north of the Red River, I'm not eating Mexican food because it's just by our standards, it's not very good. But some people recommended this to me, and so I went there and I tried it, and it was without a doubt, unquestionably the worst Mexican food I ever ate. What I didn't realize is that my coworkers would go in there and speak Spanish, but because I was a white boy who went in there and spoke English, I did not get the good Mexican food.
Oh, I don't know how I feel about this place doing that, but yeah, you got gringoed out
Yes.
of the good stuff. That's too bad. Bashir was like seemingly about to have that happen when Melora jumps in and saves his ass.
Right.
There's some cool incidents in here, including her like 0G suspension, which I actually thought had pretty good special effects for the era, as she and Bashir kind of move about in her headquarters in 0G.
They have 0G sex, which would probably be pretty fun. I thought that was a neat idea.
It sounds awkward. Uh, every action has an equal and opposite reaction, right? Or like
Oh,
would
it'd
send
be
you.
like a
It'd
waterbed
just be like
effect,
spinning
which
around like a pinball, bouncing
yeah.
off walls.
So probably like cool in theory, but not in practice.
But I don't know, maybe so. Maybe you'd be drifting really lightly, and then you just push off of the wall and just get back to what you were doing. I don't know. I don't want to get into detail, but yeah, let's. I'm gonna assume it was cool. But I don't know, like her defensiveness. Unfortunately, it was not like an endearing character quality. I can see characters who are defensive about anything and still like them or find them compelling. But this one just somehow it felt a little trite to me. It felt a little dated, a little bit almost more like it belonged in like a TOS era or maybe TNG.
I mean, I think that's very possible. I'd like to hear, what people from like that community think about
Yeah,
it.
I'm of course not speaking from a position of deep knowledge.
The original plan was to have a regular character on Deep Space Nine who was from a low gravity world, and as the science officer. But I think that was just going to be too expensive of an effect, and whenever you'd want
That's
to
right.
show her
That
like
it was
floating
going to be
around.
like a permanent thing.
I know in like the Titans novels with Riker and Troy on the Titan,
Mhm.
Melora is, I think she's the stellar cartography officer on that
Makes
ship,
sense.
and has like a low G stellar cartography room. But yeah, I like that they kind of make her like the hero of the episode when she's able to stop the that guy caught. Um,
It's one of those things that felt contrived, but like as executed, looked pretty cool.
we
Like I
hadn't seen them do like low G stuff in Star Trek before. Well,
yeah.
they do that in Star Trek 6, I guess, which had just come out shortly before this, a
Oh
couple
yeah,
years before this.
that's an
But
interesting
like
point.
other than that, I guess it hadn't really been done.
Yeah. That is true to like kind of put it in the context of the exact year it was happening, where it would have been like maybe an especially kind of cool thing to see.
Okay, we'll move on to episode 7 of season 2, Rules of Acquisition. Grand Nagus Zek assigns Quark to initiate negotiations with a planet in the Gamma Quadrant, but Quark's new associate is not what he seems. And we actually have Quark team up with a Ferengi named Pel, who is a woman disguised as a man in order to take place in capitalism and in the Ferengi Alliance. So she becomes a cross dresser in disguise to escape the Ferengi misogyny, and they go do some negotiations for the Nagus in the Gamma Quadrant. So it's a Ferengi episode, which some people hate, but I love, and I like this one. What do you
This
think of
one
it?
is like the like a Ferengi answer to one of those Shakespeare cross-dress plays, like Twelfth Night or something like that, where it happens and people mismatched people fall in love and there's kind of a comedy of errors. It had to be on their mind. Another one of those ones. I enjoyed it too. I'm trying to think if I think I felt like it maybe could have been a little bit more, and I think I sometimes feel that about the Ferengi episodes. They're almost a little too broad in the comedy for the depth and sort of nuance that I like on DS9. But I also enjoyed it. I liked their sort of I don't know, her winning over Quark with all her deep knowledge of the rules of acquisition and stuff like that. Uh, I think uh, I don't know. Maybe it was like it was kind of sad that her fate is not a great one, right?
Yeah, she just goes off on like an Endurian transport at the end, which, by the way, they would not have said Endurian transport on Next Generation. So me being a big TOS fan, like I love that DS9 can,
Started connecting
yeah,
up the dots.
they can shout out TOS. Um,
Um, this episode almost kind of got off onto a wrong foot with me, and there was something that bothered me during it, which was that Dax is real okay with Quark's casual sort of sexism, which and that runs throughout. Bashir does it sometimes. It kind of runs throughout the series. It was still the '90s, and it was just one of those things that they would kind of America had like quite come to grips with, still come to grips with, but had certainly less so. That he like literally like puts his hand on her leg, and she's just like Quark, and later on she's Kira's like dressing down the Ferengi, and she's talking about how like misogynistic and manipulative and like greedy they are. And she's like, yeah, but once you get past that, they're the most fun people to be around. And I was like, I don't know if this is the people you want to champion. If this is like, that was a little bit. It felt very regressive.
I didn't like the ongoing sexual harassment of Kira from the Nagus is what bothers me.
Yeah, and she's also sort of forced to do the, okay, enough of that, but still kind of grin and bear it. And yeah, like, as tough as Kira is, I think they would just lens it differently now. And I can almost mentally do that. Just imagine that it just happened a little differently, like she would have like grabbed his hand and be like, you do that again, this wrist is broken or something like that. It's not too hard for me to just recognize that some writing just wouldn't happen quite the same.
What about Pell, though? What do you think about Pell?
Good character. I liked her. I like that she was true to the Ferengi. She's very sweet, actually. There's a scene that I think I read that this was sort of notable, where Kira recognizes that she's in love with Quark.
Or Dax. Dax does.
Sorry. Yes, Dax. And she's like, "Oh, good for you." Before Dax has realized that Pell is a she, and so it was a casually very pro-queer sort of thing. I know that it was just for a few seconds before she realizes what's going on, but it was for the 90s. That's pretty notable.
The first time in Star Trek. It was the first time anyone had done that in Star Trek.
Yeah, I felt like it was. I wasn't 100% sure on that.
So yeah, I really like that, and I'm kind of proud that they were able to do that.
Yeah.
Also, the first Dominion mention
I was about
in the
to
franchise.
ask about that. I caught the name, and I was like, have they done this before? Because in the next several episodes, they start dropping a lot of seeds, just little bits and pieces here and there. But it was very clear that they were laying the foundation.
Yeah. So if you're paying attention, they're building up to something called the Dominion. They do it in like the silly Ferengi episode with these silly aliens that the Dosi or like the weird like clown face, which is a terrible design. I don't want to see these dudes ever again unless they show up in like lower decks. I think they would fit in great there, but they don't need to be in anything else just because the design is so ridiculous.
Is that I those things don't bother me. I think all I think I need to see is like a slightly better written story with them, and I would be fine with it. And if they re-lensed them now, if they were to show up on Picard or something like that, it's a bit too
much. It's kind of like hat on a hat type. You got like the orange face, you got like the blue dots, you got like the barbarian armor,
it looks like they cobbled it together from what they had in a nearby stage.
Yeah, they really like their V-neck shirts. It's like compare that to like the Ferengi design or like the Cardassian design. Like it doesn't quite hold up as well.
Fatheree, do we ever see Pell or hear anything from her again?
No, we do not.
I would that's another one of those things, like I always would like to see them pick up some threads here and there. It doesn't have to be literally a continuation of the story, but just to like, if we saw her as a successful trader,
she's got the skills. Retire,
even if it was almost just in passing, a Ferengi whose merchant ship they used to smuggle some stuff. I would love to see that.
And, I wouldn't say no to that. I think that'd be cool. There's like hundreds of like these like cool little one appearance characters like that, so I don't know if they can get to all of them, but
she's a strong woman character, and like whose story particularly I'd like to know how it's sort of unfolded. I thought I would place her higher on the list, but yes, there are hundreds of sort of little plot hooks that I wouldn't mind seeing continued. But shall we move on to Necessary Evil?
Yes,
V1.
So I think this is the episode that you and I both are going to like the most out of the 13 we talk about today. An attempt on Quark's life reopens a 5-year murder investigation. Basically, we get like this really cool film noir mystery with Detective Odo, and it goes back to his first case when he first came onto the station years ago and first met Gul Dukat and Quark and Kira, and we learn more about Kira's, it's more of that character stuff I said they have a lot of in season 2. We get to learn a little bit more about Kira and more about her history.
of course, the station was known as Terok Nor, and
That's on
then,
my
or like,
T-shirt I'm wearing.
oh, nice, nice. But in this episode, Father, it's Terok Noir.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, Terek Noir. Yeah, I like it. It even opens with like the rainy night and like
oh,
the
there's a
like the
beautiful
sexy
dame,
woman. Yeah, the
and
sexy dame.
she's cutting a deal with Squirk, and they have that staccato dialogue like a 40s or 50s detective movie, where both of them are real, like, kind of savvy to the manipulations, and they both kind of know what's going on and what little veiled things mean, and there's this hints of their past together. It is a straight up nod to that, and a very good one, I think.
Yeah,
It
she
was really
hires
excellent.
him to smuggle something, to pull a heist and
Mm.
smuggle something. Him and
Which, by
his
the way, leads to a fantastic heist sequence
yeah, him and his
where
dumbass
Rom,
brother.
I think, did I read correctly, Father, that this is kind of the first point where they really started indicating he's got a little bit more going on, and certainly is like more technically skilled than we had been led to believe.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. When and Rom, he kind of like evolves in like these first two seasons, but around here is where we kind of solidify on like the Rom that we'll see throughout the rest of the show.
Because yeah, Quark is like starting to give him orders about how to break into, infiltrate this, and break into the door, break past the security. And Rom is like, oh, there's a lot better ways to do that. And he ends up revealing like he's used it to in emergencies to like get into Quark's safe and stuff
Yeah.
like that. And Quark is freaking out. He's like, "You traitor!" And they're like in the middle of a heist, and he's like, "I'll never work with you again," and all this stuff, because Rom turns out is much more effective than he thinks. Although Rom is always like, claiming probably truthfully that he never actually took anything. He's just kind of too doofy to have done it.
Well,
Uh,
Quark also gets shot, and so we have like that, like, is he gonna die? And like it's like a mystery, like who shot Quark? And it's funny that like Rom becomes like the prime suspect, but he also
yeah,
like, he kind of wants his brother to die so he can inherit the bar.
right. Once Odo like in questioning him, he's like, "You're the main suspect. You stand to inherit the bar." And he's like, "I do." And he's like, "I do." um, yeah, no, it's
Irony of ironies.
there's some great dialogue throughout this, and
I love when he screams when Quark lives.
yes,
When
there's
Odo's like, "Congratulations, you saved your brother's life," and then, like he's like screaming to see like his brother alive.
yes,
Quark, I think like the smile that Quark has, it's not that like he's happy that he's alive. I think it's like happy that he still gets to like own his bar. I think like his greed is what like made him like hang on to life and like pull himself back.
because Odo actually he narrates this. He says he's like been asked by this Cisco to keep a log, and he doesn't want to do it, and he kind of gripes about all the human bureaucracy and how it would like strangle things if they what if I don't know if it wasn't digital or something like that.
Yeah, he
But
doesn't like the log entry.
he does not.
I love that
But
subversion of the Star
it,
Trek trope of the log
yeah, he
entry.
like sneers at it,
Yeah,
but it does lead him to be able to do this noir type narration. And at one
exactly.
point he says the Ferengi held onto his life or holds onto his life like it's gold pressed latinum. So there's some fun noir dialogue, like adapted for DS9 in it.
What about the
Um,
Kira stuff?
so this is the heart of the episode, that the reveals that flashing back to Terek Nor, and like, oh, this is to me it looks like a right wing paradise, Fatheree, because there's gates everywhere, there's guns, it's an armed populace, um, and it's horrible. It's
Underpaid workers.
yeah, and the what we see is that among the suspects that show up is a young Kira Nerys who uh, tells a story that like seems plausible and is actually a partial truth, but is part of some wheels within wheels. As oh, by the way, it was great seeing Odo meet her for the first time and Quark for the first time, and serving alongside Gold. I guess meeting Gold Dukat for the first time. So like
Well, they had met
all this big
before when he saw the Cardassian neck trick, I guess.
right. I guess for we the viewer. But yeah,
This is
there's
their
just
first formal meeting, I
a
guess.
lot of firsts for Odo in that one. But their ability, like this is one that's about Kira's um, sabotage and her kind of wet work stuff for the Bajoran resistance. You know, she was she what did she lied and said she was what did she initially tell Odo?
That she was the one doing the sabotage, and
Right, but it was like
that's why
sabotaging
she
the mine
couldn't kill,
equipment,
right,
right?
and that's why she couldn't have been the one to kill the shop owner.
Right. But in fact, she was there to get from the shop owner the names he kept
Yeah,
because he was running a he was of Bajoran what do you call them
collaborator.
collaborators. Yeah, that it's a neat plot to the episode too. I like the mystery of it all and the slow reveals of everything. Because Odo starts out in this very justice is black and white, and by the end he has to get to that noir place where everything is shades of
Yeah.
gray. And he has to the point where he will cover for someone. That's the biggest thing. It's a huge moral compromise for this, paladin type character.
I was so in the
Yes.
mood for this episode because on St. Patty's Day, I just showed Antonia the Liam Neeson movie, Michael Collins.
Yeah. I remember you saying that was really good flick.
Yeah, and it has a lot of like like the IRA, running around like shooting people working for the oppressive imperialistic British government. And so like I was down for Kira to do some of that here.
Now she did reveal that she didn't want to necessarily kill him, right? It kind of came about, right?
Yeah, she's not like a murderous psychopath, but I mean,
Yeah.
like at the end of the day, it's like, okay, you collaborate with fascism, and
Yeah.
like if you're gonna cause problem for us in the resistance, like I gotta take care of this problem.
Yep.
If you lay down with dogs, you're gonna get fleas.
And Odo, who's at this part tried to be the impartial constable, realizes he has to kind of cover for her. He does cover for her when Gul Dukat does checks in on her. Anyway, it's a great mystery. I love the pacing on it, intercut between the present and the past. There's funny stuff with Quark and Rum, and then there's a heartbreaker of an ending when Odo finds out the truth, 5 years after the fact about what that Kira had lied to him, and they had become these really pretty tight friends in that interim. And at least at the time, there's a suggestion that it's going to always have a kind of a pall on their friendship. It's going to cloud things, and that's how the episode ends, which is 100% the tone and style of noir movies.
But I think he forgives her pretty quick because he does say that line like it doesn't have to like
right. It's
ruin
the
things.
episode ends on the kind of pregnant pause, like it wants it to like hang and have some weight, and their faces look unsure. But yes, I think because we saw the decisions he made earlier in the episode, it seems clear that ultimately this is a guy who's got her back, and I think that's at the core of who they are. It was.
The show does a good job of questioning: is Odo a good person? Like he's got skeletons in his closet. Like he's like he did like work for the Cardassians. And I like that it's willing to like ask those questions about Odo.
Yep. It was. I don't know if I'd say it's the best episode to date, but it would be in my top 3, no doubt.
Okay, well, let's go to the one that I think is the worst. Episode 9.
Proto-matter, Fatheree. How can it be the worst?
This episode is called Second Sight. Sisko falls in love with a woman visiting the station, but she is not what she appears. Yeah, basically this crazy scientist dude, Sciatic, comes to the station. He's the famous terraformer. He's about to he's about to resurrect a dead star, and he has this wife with him, and all of a sudden Sisko starts seeing a woman who looks like the wife, who he falls in love with, and it turns out it's all some weird psychoprojective telepathic illusion type of stuff and nonsense. And at the end of the day,
it was so weird that when they ask him what happened, Bashir is like, I have no idea.
I have no idea. Yeah, it's just weird. The episode kind of ends on a weird note. This is one of my least favorite DS9 episodes.
I agree. I absolutely agree, and so I don't have a lot to say about it. I actually thought that it started out from an interesting place that could have been really interesting. It's the anniversary of the death of Sisko's
Yeah.
wife,
4 years.
and he's by chance weirdly sees a woman who he hits it off with in conversation. It could have been this interesting story about recovering from loss and how people process grief. And I actually like the part where Jake told him it's okay with me if you want to like date somebody again. And then there's some little moments in there that I like, but overall, aside from the fact that like the storyline is kind of the sci-fi elements of it are real, like what? I also think that Trek is a little too enamored of its like quirky asshole geniuses, the kind of blowhard egotistical geniuses.
I liked Sietic. I kind of had fun with him. And I was more interested with his stuff than I was with like the Sisko and Finna stuff.
I just like, apparently this guy is scared off 9 wives previously. He knows he's a blowhard, but he still gets this kind of sacrificial ending, and Sisko is smiling like, what a good man
he goes out like a boss when he's talking about like how he wrote his autobiography like no one else could do it justice, but
they're all groaning while he's constantly telling stories about himself. They do play it looks fun. On that like this is a recurring thing as far back as like whether it's the cult of personality that Khan has, or any of a number of like kind of genius scientists on Next Generation who are also eccentric and jerky. There's like some people who like kind of are enjoying Sayatek, if that's how you say his name.
Sayatek, I think.
And some people who are just like rolling their eyes every time, which is kind of how those kind of egotistical chatterbox people are in the real world. So I mean, I guess it's accurate. I just think that Trek is a little hero worshipy about brilliant assholes.
Well, I think it's very self-aware of it right here.
I guess. I want him to be meaner to them. Instead, they're like, oh, it's just like a wacky uncle. And I'm like, he may actually be a prick. He may have ruined those 9 women's lives or been like a really miserable part of it by the end. And I'm like, I don't know that he needs to get lionized just because he's a good scientist and maybe an ass person.
I don't think he bothered me like that. But,
I hate him.
I liked a lot of his dialogue. I like when he was like, "Be sure to say that I sacrificed myself on the altar of science." And then when he's like, "Let there be," like he's God. Like he was like thinks he's God at the end. That's like his last thought before he dies. The Klingon poetry. It's weird that they make a reference to Kang, the fall of Kang. Because in a couple episodes we meet Kang, so I guess there's another Kang. There's like another Kang who fell.
Yeah,
so that makes it sound like he dies.
Yeah, I guess that was probably a right hand not talking to the left thing.
Sure,
the original writers of this might well have thought that they were writing about Kang from TOS, and then they pretty much had to quick retcon. Nope, another Kang. But that's the nature of serial fiction with all its different writers being handed off to.
And I like seeing the Nebula class, that USS Prometheus ship. I like getting on some Starfleet sets and off the Cardassian station.
Honestly, I liked even though it was just a throwaway line, I did actually like that they mentioned proto-matter. It sounds like they figured out how to use it better. So that was a nice little nod to some old TOS movie stuff.
But I gotta say that I hate any of like the romance stuff between Finna and Sisko. I don't see like any reason like why they're into each other other than they're like, oh hey, like you're good looking and like we're both just standing here alone. Let's like each other.
You know what? That's enough to get the ball rolling. But when I realized that like she had like kind of was asking questions of him, but anytime he asked something about her, she would kind of defer away from it. And then I was like, they haven't really had a good conversation. It is kind of just like, she's there and she's pretty.
Yeah, there's no substance to it.
Yeah, and I feel like a deeper episode would have had something with some more substance to it.
And I hate her design. I hate the like double Vulcan ear. It's like a Vulcan ear, but with like 2 points instead of 1. It's just like, that's dumb. And I'm glad we never see it again.
Yeah, I think that's all my thoughts are on it. I felt like it's the kind of thing that with notably better writing, could have been something. I think they would have had to have it pretty heavily overhauled.
Do you want to move on to the next one, or do you have more on
Yeah,
Second Sight?
let's hit up Sanctuary.
Okay, so here we go. Sanctuary, episode 10. A group of refugees come through the wormhole in search of Quintana, their fabled homeworld. You know, this is basically a society that's matriarchal. The women are in control. That's why my girlfriend Antonia loves this episode. She gets a kick out of that. But it's like this refugee allegory and something that it does feel like a little bit relevant today in recent years. That's become a more topical thing than probably back in the 90s when this was written, but historically has been around for a long time. What do you think of this one?
Mixed bag. I thought the concepts were good, but I didn't love the depiction of the people who were clearly meant to be I would say sort of an analog to sort of a more rural, maybe uneducated group. They're a little bit wild, running around the station. They have kind of what I thought were sort of weird makeup that had this sort of that mottled skin effect. It looked like their skin was all flaking.
They're kind of gross because
they had some weird, part crazy hair that looked like it was just sometimes straps of leather hide on at least one of them.
Yeah, speaking of not great alien designs, come on, Michael Westmore, you're almost there.
I think it got off on a slightly bad foot with me because they had sort of weak design. They gave them just kind of crazy hair and stuff. And then there's an initial language barrier because the translator can't just process their language for whatever reason. And I was like, oh, this is going to be some kind of Darmok type thing about language maybe. But then 5 or 10 minutes later, it just kind of kicks in and it gets it. And I guess it was meant to just indicate, in an allegorical way, the difficulty of, when there is a language barrier with immigrants and how that kind of creates an initial bit of chaos. They have trouble moving them through the station because they're curious and they want to check everything out. And it's aggravating to their handlers from DS9 because they can't communicate with them. I got the idea behind it. I just thought it was the execution was a little bit weak, and I guess that would sort of go for most of the episode. I did. To me, the most potent part of it was near the end. They are, of course, are looking for a sort of fabled homeland that's kind of a prophetic kind of mystical thing, and they decide that they think Bajor fits it, that they're right in orbit of it. And so telling them no when they actually seem like they're farmers, they think that they can handle a section of Bajor where they would be put, and the Bajorans are like, we just don't have the resources. We're barely scraping by on our own, and they're like, the truth of the matter is, you would run into hardships, and we will feel compelled to try and help you because that's who we are, and we can't afford to do that. And I was like, that did sort of clarify, at least I think, the best good faith arguments against immigration when you feel like you're struggling just to keep your own head above water. At least, what you want to be the argument. Maybe it's not. I don't think there's any suggestion that the Bajorans are saying this just in any mean-spirited way. Fatheree, didn't you feel that they were being as honorable as they could?
Yes, and I think their concern was they didn't think that the southern continent was salvageable, but these people were like, well, we're such good farmers, let us try.
I read that the original premise of the episode, the original script, was going to have it so that because they were such badass botanists and stuff, that they were going to be allowed to settle there. And
I think that would have been cool, but I kind of like that. The episodes it doesn't always work out. Every now and then, you take a loss.
Right. And it's not like they were just sent on their way. They actually did find another planet for them. It's just that they felt that kind of this one fulfilled also their sort of prophecy as well. I thought it was kind of, they talked about Quintana throughout, and it takes on this mythic significance. And so later when, I think it's Kira who has to say, sorry, you're kind of just not welcome here. We can't take you in. We just can't. And the lady says, hey, you were right about one thing. You're not Quintana. And I was like, it kind of comes off as rightfully, I guess, harsh. Man, we thought you guys were the myth and the legend. I guess you weren't. And it has some weight by the end of the show.
I like the chemistry between, I think her name is Hanik, the main Sacrian lady. I like the stuff we see between her and Kira. And
she was a unplanned leader. She was like someone who was just taking charge.
Yeah.
And it was just like, it looks like you're running the show.
And the language miscommunication stuff, like, I really enjoy the joke about how Kira thought she liked that dress, and she was like, "No, I was saying it was like the ugliest thing ever." And then Kira's like, "Oh yeah, I thought it was terrible too." Like, but they kind of like bond over that, and then it makes it sadder when things don't work out at the end.
Right. Seems like Kira's kind of found a friend, and that they sort of bonded under duress, and then they sort of part on kind of unpleasant terms. It was, I think, because the episode ended on a dramatic high. I warmed to it more by the end, but something, I think the getting there was just okay for me. It felt like it's sort of somewhat middle of the road episode.
Oh, and we also had the live music in Quarks, where the guy is actually playing like the DS9 theme song.
I wondered about that, because at first I thought it was like, it definitely was, and then I was like, well, wait, maybe it's not. Was it the straight up?
It's a little bit of a different arrangement, but
just slightly jazzed up.
Yeah, so they do that in Lower Decks too, where Boimler's humming the TNG theme, which I think that's fine if like these pieces of music like exist somehow like in universe also. I know that bothers you, but I think it's okay.
It bothers me in the most minor of ways. Like, I don't think I'd really like, if you were asking me like any issues I had with this episode, that wouldn't even chart.
Yeah, well, you didn't bring it up. I did, no.
So. I did notice, though, I was like, that guy looks familiar, and I looked him up, and he's like, oh, he's from the Trouble with Tribbles episode.
The other cool guest star in here is Andrew Koenig, Walter Koenig's son, who plays the Sacrian.
One of the kids?
Yeah, and he was in, is it Growing Pains? Where he's like that kid Boner?
What?
Like his nickname? Yeah.
Yeah, that was like his doofus friend.
Unfortunately, he committed suicide in 2010, I believe.
Huh.
And yeah, like if you look at like a picture of like Walter Koenig from like 2009 and look at a picture of him from like 2011, it like he like aged like 20 years like after his son died.
That's awful. I was not aware of that. But yeah, that's super, super, super horrible. You know what I was thinking about this, Fatheree, as I was watching the episode, was that I almost kind of wanted this to be one of those things that unfolded not as a singular episode, because as we have been maybe acutely aware of in the last several years, of like the immigration crisis, a politicized event that is quite possibly not the danger it has been made out to be, but is something that we certainly as a country cannot come to an agreement on, and it's been such a long running thing now, and of course it's always when especially in countries that have civil strife and that there's always refugee crises going on everywhere in the world. I think it would have been cooler as a subplot that ran through a whole season.
Yeah.
And maybe they will do some more stuff with that. I know there's war stuff coming. But I think it is a little difficult to do it in kind of one episode. Well, but it's a solid take on it.
I don't think it applies very well to like a real world representation at this point, because so much like the destabilization that happens is because of our country here in the United States. Like a drug war in Latin America has created like this huge refugee crisis, or our conflicts in the Middle East that are primarily instruments of transferring wealth from taxpayers to defense contractors. Is destabilizing huge chunks of well, I'm just saying like Bajor is not like creating these refugees, so I think it doesn't really translate from like an American perspective. This doesn't really translate.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. Although I also think there's a universality to just dealing with refugees, another language, another culture. And, there's, I think they did dramatize that in an interesting way, as you see especially some of the younger ones, who are kind of a little bit more. They're a little feistier about it, don't they? Isn't there a
You
fight
make
at some
Nog,
point?
yeah, they make Nog do the Ferengi screeching.
Right.
His Uncle Quark has to come and protect him, and then Nog's just like this like scared animal like hiding behind its parent or something, like hissing at them. It cracks me up.
Yeah, but broadly, those are all things that people do have to deal with, like in a refugee situation. It's just that, yeah, you're right. They can't do the sort of nuance of like long term reasons for why the crisis occurred, in which theoretically the country taking in the refugees is complicit in them, but in such a way that people might not really see it or choose to not see it.
And Ira Stephen Bear often comments on how the Ferengi were written to be like the modern day humans. So you can have like Quark be like the like shitty like modern day guy. They're like, we're like these dirty people gonna get out of here. They're hurting my business. I'm ready for them to go. Like their problems ain't my problems. They need to get.
All right, Fatheree, let's jump on to Chris Sarandon's episode.
Yes, I figured you would enjoy his guest appearance here in the episode Rivals. Quark feels threatened when a con artist arrives on the station and opens up a competing bar. Meanwhile, Chief O'Brien is determined to beat Dr. Bashir at racquetball. I really enjoy the A story and the B story here. I think they tie together well. And yeah, we have an Elurian like Guinan from TNG, an Elurian guest star. So
like
what do you think of this?
Soren, we have now, of the 3 Elurians we've seen, 2 of them have been assholes. So what does that say? Great. Guinan was a lucky thing. The race of listeners, I actually kind of like that notion that the race of listeners might be, instead of like, what we were originally led to believe, in this race of thoughtful therapists, essentially, but rather a race of con men and manipulators.
Well, the original plan was for him to become a recurring character and a recurring rival to Quark, but this is his only episode. They didn't follow through on that. And
I think that's probably okay. I think it was a good one-off episode, and I enjoyed it, but it was also, pretty lightweight. Both A and B plots are pretty lightweight, because essentially there's a rival casinos, roughly, and then racquetball rivals.
Yes.
This is not high stakes. Only later on are there minor issues with the station caused by the probability distortion stuff.
But it's good character stuff for Miles and Julian, and we build up that relationship.
Yep. Right, that's absolutely true. But I do want to quick start by mentioning Chris Sarandon, who is always great at being sort of sleazy villains. He's probably best known as Prince Humperdinck from The Princess Bride, but he was also the vampire in Fright Night.
Yeah,
he's been in a ton of other stuff.
We're both big fans of that movie, I think.
Yeah, he's great. He is great at being smarmy, and he actually isn't at full on smarm in this, but he's sleazy. He ends up with this prisoner's weird device, which in a somewhat clever way, I think they don't bother to really explain what people are even quite doing with the game, why it's so alluring to them. But it's some kind of little bop it kind of game.
Yeah, I kind of have to squint and not dwell on that stuff too hard, because I think like the game and just like the probability device is like, this stuff, I don't know, it probably should be like explained a little bit better, but I don't know if there's a way to explain it that would be satisfying.
Like, we don't know why this guy would, the alien who he got it from in prison, would have such a really potent device. It probably would have done to have that as a reveal during the course of it. It would have been kind of cool. What if it had a chip from the Guardian of Forever, some stone chipped off of that, and essentially hacked? I think that'd be kind of cool.
Sure, yeah. There's ways to explain it, but they don't. But
they're a little bit
sad. That dude who's like, he just wants to die now. He's like cursed. It's like a cursed monkey paw or something. Like he just wants to get rid of it. And he's like, oh, I finally win, and then he dies.
I'm trying to think. Did it influence like all events? Yeah, that basically everything sort of worked in the favor of Chris Sarandon. But like later on in the episode, it starts to sort of fail. Like people win at his casino games all at once, and he has to pay up. So did it and clearly it didn't always work for its original owner. So do we quite understand what the process is by which it works?
Not really.
It seems vague. Like, it definitely luck was on his side at first. He was winning all of Quark's customers, and just as and we ultimately see it transfer to the game where O'Brien is like, cannot miss a shot. The ball is always in his favor. But yeah, it is one of those where I'm like, oh, they didn't really stake out their rules for it too well. But it's kind of fun to watch the rivalry. I loved actually when he hires on Rom, and what do you call it? He says I'll come back to work for you, Quark, for like twice the pay or something like
That's
that.
such a beautiful shot, by the way, that moment, because we start with like, it's all one shot. We start with like Cisco and Quark on the top deck of the station right outside of Quark's bar, take the lift down to the bottom deck right outside of Quark's bar.
I did notice that.
And then we see Rom, walk out, go across the corridor to Club Martis. I just love it because we get a great look at this fantastic set, this is like a crazy thing to say, but I always say, like, if the Doctor from Doctor Who showed up in the TARDIS and offered me, hey, Fatheree, I can take you anywhere in space and time, where would you want to go? The first place I would want to go would be to the 1990s of the Paramount Studios, and I would just like want to walk around on the Deep Space Nine promenade. I would want to like go walk around on these sets.
I mean, I don't know if it's sad. It seems pretty cool to me.
It's first stop, baby.
If I found out that there were actual space stations and stuff out there, I'd maybe give them a higher rating. But until we know about some cool alien civilizations, then yeah, who am I to say that that's not a great place to go? but when Rom makes that demand, Quark is like, a bidding war over you. He's so disgusted at it.
Yeah.
That it was great.
He shaves the latinum. No, I don't. Well, not much. I love all that stuff.
To be sleazy with his think of the children scam. There's some fun stuff there.
The poison elixir he tries to give Bashir.
Oh yeah, that's right. And then there was a cool bit with Cisco where he's when he's Quark is like potentially about to go out of business, and he's talking. He's like, you need to interfere, and he's like, you begged me to stay when you first came on board. And Cisco's like, I didn't beg, I blackmailed you. I liked him putting it in such concrete terms. I thought that was great.
Yeah. Quark always like reframes things to like sound the most convenient for him. When he's like, I had a contract, and like Cisco's like, no, like you bribed the Cardassians before we got here. Like that's not a contract.
I actually thought that was a good idea. They're like, the Federation does not recognize that as a contract. There's a small bit in here that I liked where, so the B plot is that O'Brien, who was like a solid just amateur racquetball thing, goes up against Bashir, who's like was actually like competitive professionally or like semi-professionally.
Yeah, he's captain of the team at med school.
And he wrecks O'Brien to the point where he's like telling people O'Brien, because of his pride, won't back down. And it's like another round. And then later on, Bashir is telling, I don't know who it was, Dax, maybe? Whoever it was. He's like, oh my God, he was just red-faced, and I thought he was going to have a heart attack. And so he's trying to, like, he tries to, like, throw some games, and O'Brien catches it, and O'Brien's pride is hurt. But there was a small bit that came out of that beyond just a little bit of kind of fun interplay and their slow bonding that I liked, which was that Keiko, when he's going to when the big competition happens that Quark sets up, Keiko, who we do see him bickering with quite a bit, is like, hey, kick his butt tonight. And she's like, no matter what, we're gonna celebrate. And I'm like, oh, they're gonna get it on. They're gonna have some drinks and get it on. and I was just happy to see him and Keiko having a.
Keiko gets too much hate. Like I don't get the Keiko hate at all. Like I know sometimes like she's written to kind of be like the annoying, nagging wife, but there's a lot of likable stuff with her too, and I think people give her a hard time.
A bit of the kind of cheap humor, like Keiko's food is no good and stuff like that, more than once. And I think the writers, there is a weight of, I think, actually just some cliched and tropey writing on her. I think sometimes the writers did a disservice to her. But as to actually what she does, whether it's running the school, taking in Rugal in the episode we just talked about, encouraging Chief to kick some ass here, she's actually doing a lot more like good stuff. And Keiko definitely has gotten a raw deal.
Well, you ready to go on to the next episode?
I am. I am.
So we have episode 12 up next, titled The Alternate. The Bajoran scientist who used to be Odo's teacher arrives with evidence of others of Odo's kind. I call this one the one where Odo's daddy comes to visit, and we get to meet the guy who, the scientist who Odo has like some major daddy issues with, Dr. Mora, who they actually originally wanted Renee to play this guy too, and be like, oh yeah, like Odo based his look on the guy who discovered him, or the guy who worked with him.
I'm glad they did. They did that with Data.
It would have been like a different thing here. It's like the shapeshifters trying to take the shape, but
I mean, I get it. I guess it could have worked.
That's why they gave him the same hairstyle though, where he has like his hair slicked back like Odo. It's like this is where he got it from.
I assume that Odo just did that as a simple hairstyle that was easy to sort of attempt to mimic.
Yeah.
I was thinking about how Odo falls within that sort of Trek outsider status like Spock and Data. He's a variant on the same kind of ideas. And that all of those guys have, whenever they're lensed through parents, it's always through the father. Not that we never saw Spock's mom, but that primarily we were interested in his relationship with Sarek, Data to Dr. Soong, and Odo to Dr. Mora. And they're all sort of troubled relationships. That it definitely speaks to an interesting theme in Star Trek about fathers and sons and sort of their difficult reconciliations at times. I don't know if they might need to shake that one up a little bit. But it is interesting, and I thought this guy, the actor in the role as Dr. Mora, did a good job of portraying somebody who was conflicted. I thought he's kind of awful later on in something he does, but before we get to that, I did want to jump to the beginning when we find out that Ferengi sell their pieces of their dead as artifacts, and Odo busts he busts Quark for selling pieces of a person who's not actually even dead. It's just some other body, but he can get like presumably a better price for this particular guy, and Quark's like, he's got the Ferengi certificate of dismemberment or something like that. Anyway, I was laughing at it. It was such a Ferengi thing to do. It seems like ultimate capitalism, yet it's like literally carving up the bodies for sale too. I thought it was like a great, ridiculous but great Ferengi idea.
They have a continuity goof in here. Well, I guess it wasn't a goof in this episode, but they really suggest that like Cisco's dad is dead, where he talks about like, yeah, like when my father became sick and in the end there was nothing I could do to help him. But we meet Cisco's dad in like 2 episodes. So it's like, what are you talking about?
This is the same
or not 2 episodes, 2 seasons. We meet him in season 4.
Okay. Yeah, this is the same reporting going on about Kang's death.
Yeah.
I guess.
But I don't really enjoy this episode for whatever reason. I guess because after like you know the mystery to it doesn't quite hold up as well. With Odo as the monster all along, and it's just kind of like his emo daddy issues, and then it's like resolved so quickly.
Yeah, there is some truth to that. I thought there were some strong moments, and the kind of awkward family stuff early on where Quark, clearly, I think needling Odo and maybe being a little sincere, is like extolling his virtues as a constable to Dr. Mora, and Odo is like, Quark, he's pissed off as usual.
I love how the tables turn when Dr. Mora shows up, and then like all of a sudden like Quark's in control of the situation.
Yeah, he's like embarrassing him, in front of his parent, and then. Who, by the way, they like Odo.
It's like McCoy and Spock. Like, oh, he had a teddy bear, in Journey to Babel.
Exactly. And later on, even I noticed that Mora does the same thing, where he's kind of talking about what do you call it, the achievements or whatever. He's like I guess the early days, and he's actually talking over Odo to Dax. They're both talking to Dax, I think, right? And he's kind of talking over him. Odo will start to talk, and then he'll continue it, because this guy is another one of those Starfleet guys with a bit of an ego. who's a little.
He's a Bajoran guy. He's not a Starfleet guy.
He's one of their genius scientist guys though, and he's a little full of himself, and he talks over it, and Odo's like, groaning because Dad won't stop telling the story about him. The scene that I thought was the heartbreaking was the one where he reduces Odo to almost tears.
Yes, I like that.
He is and I was like, this is a shit thing to do though. That's some shit emotional manipulation, I think, where he's like, he wants his son back in a way, and he scares him unfairly about what's going to happen. He's like, they're going to dissect you, Odo. They're going to put you in a zoo. And Odo goes from being this composed guy that he always is to he's profusely sweating, or he's just glistening and terrified, and it's super sad to see. I thought Rene, however you say it, Auberjonois, did a really amazing
He
job.
plays it so well, and then the makeup too, it all combines together and works very well. And the way it was written and the way it was shot, well done.
I think it felt anticlimactic to me a little bit in the end, because we only learn actually a little bit more about Odo. The mystery, like you say, is kind of, once it's done, it's done. And they do, I guess, get some artifact.
And some clues to his origin in the Gamma Quadrant.
Yeah, it's true. They're continuing to, I guess, stake out the territory of the Gamma Quadrant.
Also, I like that scene where, O'Brien is, crawling around in the corridors, and it feels like something out of an Alien movie, and you think, he's in deep danger, but he's really not. He just finds, some dead goo.
Yeah, it's a good suspenseful thing. I feel like it's a definite tribute to Alien.
Are you ready for the last episode of the day?
Yeah. Let's hit up episode 13, Armageddon Game.
O'Brien and Bashir help to rid two races of their biological weapons. However, both governments want to ensure no technical knowledge of the weapons can survive. Basically, these people are trying to murder O'Brien and Bashir, and so they're on the run trying to survive, while there's the lie sent back to the station that they're already dead. But Keiko and Cisco figure out that that's not true, and they have to go rescue O'Brien and Bashir. I'm not crazy about this one, but I love the Bashir O'Brien stuff that's in it.
Yeah, I think of the various episodes that we've talked about where they've had some screen time together, it's the best one for that, because it kind of, when people are sick or dying, which they are in this one, they kind of get through past the bullshit and they talk about some more serious stuff. But I assumed it was some kind of power play, and instead it was more like, we're trying to kill them for peace. It's just what we have to do.
Yeah.
And I actually was somewhat sympathetic, because they said they've been warring for centuries. And, at that point, what are two more deaths? They're minor sins in service to peace.
The Talani and the Kelleron. Also not crazy about their designs, but
no,
it is what it is.
They were pretty ho-hum aliens.
We don't see them again.
Okay, well, fair enough. I was thinking that this episode might have been a little bit inspired by the Michael Crichton book Rising Sun. You ever see that, Fatheree, or the movie?
No, I'm unfamiliar with it.
The real quick version is that it follows. It's like a techno thriller that's set in in Japan, and I think follows a murder mystery that has some camera footage of a murder. And it was the first time I became aware of what could be done with digital doctoring. This was early 90s or even late 80s when it was written. I think early 90s, though, kind of circa Jurassic Park. And technology. Now we have deep fakes and stuff, which are ridiculous as to the level of realism they can get.
Well, I love seeing O'Brien go into soldier mode.
Even Bashir got to be a little bit of a badass, but O'Brien is a soldier.
Yeah, he can switch back from engineer to soldier when he needs to. They show that throughout Deep Space Nine several different times. When the shit hits the fan, he will go back to being the soldier fighting the Cardassians. And you actually get to see some of the ruins on the planet. So the idea of this war was really bad. It has some impact. We see some of the consequences of it.
Yeah, I actually and I think part of the reason why I felt some sympathy, even though they are clearly, they're trying to kill our heroes and they're bad people, but they're also utterly desperate people, presumably. And I was thinking about I grew up with the tail end of the specter of the Cold War, and it weighed heavily on my childhood. I had nightmares about nuclear war, and one of my favorite Trek books was one called Prime Directive that was about a botched effort by a first contact team that accidentally triggers a nuclear war. I think it ultimately gets undone with some time travel, but it's a really cool storyline. And it did because you actually see the bombs go off and you see the world dying. Like, I'm kind of acutely aware of it, and stories that use that as a hook tend to kind of get under my skin. And
yeah, it is kind of a nuclear disarmament type story.
Right. It is hypothetically about if the United States and the Russia at the height of the Cold War, if they could disarm, and it would require killing 2 innocent people, let's say, to really fully throw away all the nukes, would it be worth it? And I'm like, on one level, I would say yes in the grand scheme of things. But when you're watching a fictional show and you know those people, when that person is somebody you love,
well, couldn't you make them just like promise to like leave and not come back to your space, and like then you don't have to kill them? Like that seems pretty good too.
I mean, the way they set it up is after centuries of warfare, they're just at their wits' end. You know, they are willing to commit crimes, and like. Normally, I would say, well, some crimes are forgivable. Stealing a loaf of bread to survive is forgivable. Is killing seems like it should be unforgivable, but 2 people to save a world? Don't the needs of the many? It's not the story they were telling, though. Like, if they were, I think they would have wanted to be more nuanced. And I did wish that they had said, like, what happened to these people at the end of this. Like, they got busted, but it was not about, like, whatever their punishment was. I assume they got, like, Starfleet sanctions or something.
Yeah, probably. I also enjoyed, like, Sisko's speech that he gives, and well, just about, like, when they get the news that, like, they died. And
oh, yeah.
And then Quark, when he said, they were good customers, they always paid their bar tab, and
yeah,
good
like,
customers are as rare as Latinum.
That was a meaningful thing to him. Yeah, well, it's one of the rules of acquisition, or
he didn't reference it as a rule of acquisition.
Okay, yeah.
And then Keiko's thing, where like she's like, I know it's fake because Miles never drinks coffee in the afternoon, and then the other episode is like, I drink coffee in the afternoon all the time. What are you talking about? Because that made it feel so real. Like it's like couples are like that. Like people like pride themselves on like, oh, I know like all this stuff about this person, and it's like, oh, you actually like got this one wrong. But it's like it's something that you probably like never talk about or articulate to one another. So of course you might get things like that wrong.
I think that's a good point, but I kind of didn't like that because I thought it undermined Keiko as like investigator. To say that she actually, it turns out it was just mere luck that she happened to stumble onto the conspiracy.
It was worth it for me. I thought the joke was worth it.
I think you make a good case for it. But yeah, the heart of the episode is O'Brien and Bashir while they're trying to get this device going, and
the family man versus like the young bachelor, like they talk about that stuff.
Yeah, who's also like a kind of an elite, sort of an elite, somewhat intellectual student.
The English doctor versus like the Irish non-commissioned officer.
Yep. And yet, of course, it's the engineer who's got to talk the amateur engineer through all of this, of what's going on. If there's a metaphor there, then they are saying that O'Brien probably has the more vital skill set. But on the other hand, he'd be dead if not for Bashir. So I guess they each played their part.
This is where they're starting to develop into the friendship that they'll get into in the later seasons that I really like.
They talk about women. They talk about like their relationships, and the one that the closest that Bashir ever got to marriage.
He had a foot fetish.
Had the most exquisite feet, Chief, or something like that. And O'Brien says like, hey, you think marriage is like the end of things, and he's like, to me, it's like an ongoing adventure that even the tough parts are worth it because you're coming home to somebody you love, and he kind of shuts down the bachelor view that basically he's marriage is something that's the end of things or whatever. It's a good talk, I think. Bashir is right, but I'm just...
The runabout switcheroo is kind of cool at the end.
Oh yeah, they actually play up the fact that their like sensors are down, and they in effect kind of do a version of the same switcheroo that was done with the doctored footage that would have killed off Bashir and O'Brien.
Have a taste of your own medicine.
That's right. Now I hope your world goes back to war for centuries.
Yeah.
That's what they're going to do, is they're going to beam down some more of that Harvester napalm or whatever and fuck them up. Yeah, no, I thought it was a good episode. Maybe not great, but like definitely the character moments were strong, and yeah, I kind of liked seeing them. Bashir and O'Brien got to also like roam around corridors with guns, looking like badasses.
Oh, and yeah, more of the season 2 character stuff that they weren't quite ready to get into in season 1, or as much as they will in later seasons of the show. But I think that's it. I think that's going to do it for today.
Yep. That was fun to go through. I've been enjoying this trip through season 2, and we'll round it out next time. I'll see if they manage to have a good finale the same way the first season did.
Well, we'll be talking about that next when we do season 2, part 2 of 2. And until then, as always, live long and prosper, y'all.
Listen to the Tex-Trek podcast through Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or at tex-trek.com. Like us on Facebook at facebook.com/tex-trek, and follow Fatheree on Twitter at txtrek. Please support us by liking our videos and subscribing to our channel on YouTube. Thank you and take care.